Do you know, I have discovered what is wrong with Jimmy. It's very simple, really. He was born out of his time. There's no place for people like that any longer, in sex or politics or anything, really. That's why he's so futile. Sometimes when I listen to him, I feel he thinks he's still in the middle of the French Revolution. And that's where he ought to be, of course. He doesn't know where he is or where he's going. He'll never do anything. And he'll never amount to anything. Look back in anger. John Osborne. And yes, my friends, you have entered the realm one more time of Radio Tipping Point, and our show today is titled I Accept Being Uncomfortable. And the pot stirrer, as always, Mike Boyle. I'd like to start the show with a letter that I received from the trenches. The person who actually inspired the title of the show today. And I will take a bit of a creative license tied to some of the things expressed within this letter. But here goes. Before that, I went to Australia. I studied various singular courses at the Swedish universities, such as English and creative writing. In Sydney, I studied a Bachelor of Arts course in communication, social inquiry, also at the University of Technology, Sydney. It was within this time period that I realized I was an artist and not just a journalist or anything like that. The only thing in the world that interested me was to figure out how to paint and communicate through art. I was dreaming about it, and the only thing that made me want to get up out of bed in the morning was this obsession of mine. Returning to Stockholm in 2007, just a year before I turned 30 years old. The employment market in Sweden at the time was really bad, and I had no contacts in terms of getting an apprenticeship. Place such as a journalist or a social researcher. Because of my age and because I was living abroad. I had become obsessed to create a portfolio which would take me into a fine art institution. Although I knew I could live my identity as an artist without it, I also knew that it was the only possible way for me to go forward and manifest my dream. I worked for 2 years at stressful office jobs, struggling both emotionally and mentally. A knife into the soul. I needed to pay the rent. I needed to find means to proceed on my plan. Yet my fear of financial instability was pushing me down, as well as what can come from a 4-year period of deep depression and anxiety. Later working part-time as an assistant for youth diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Meanwhile, painting in my living room, which I had turned into a studio. Finally, in 2012, I managed to get into an art university college, a form of bridging school for young artists who want to proceed into fine art universities. It was a 2-year program, and I prepared my portfolio there while still working at the part-time job. I was burned out from all the self-created pressure and other problems in my life, as well as the realization that my odds in order to get into an academy was 1% as a 39-year-old in comparison to my colleagues in their 20s, all of them born with cultural capital. Many had established Swedish artists as parents, and let's be honest, the equity monster has raised its head one more time. Yet somehow I became a legend at the school due to my work obsession. I was there 7 days a week, day and night, when I was not scheduled at other jobs, which meant that my day was occupied all the time. No fault tolerance there. I was running a lot at the natural reserve near where I lived. It was during this time that all of us at the school were sending applications. In my case, I think it was to 6 European universities. Every minute of the day, I had developed an almost desperate feeling and a lump in my stomach at the thought of not getting in. I fought it by running while I was repeatedly saying out loud, "I will get in. I am already in. I will get in. I am already in. I will get 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 in." I have been in for quite some time now. Despite the anxiety, it was true implementation, and I partially started to believe in it. Although the idea of leaving Sweden from a burnout perspective was very scary, I knew I had no other choice. As I saw it, it was my last boat. I made it into the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna 2015 and left Sweden alone. I had also received a place at Corpus Design Program in Stockholm, which I found out later on was where a very famous professor and I had made up my mind to go and become a professional painter. As I walked out the door, my intuition was telling me that she would not take me. But on the question, "How old are you?" I gave the answer, "Turning 39. And she exclaimed, "What? You do not like it?" I'm sorry, let's repeat that. "What? You do not look like it." I replied, "I do not act my age." And that got a chuckle or two from the assistants. At the end, I think that's what actually did it for me. Why she must have referred me to the painting professor who came in to spoke to me as I was working on the spot at the exam during these 3 days. Still, it was unclear whether I would make it or not. On the third day, a massive panic started to grow in my chest, and I had an emotional breakdown, crying as I was facing the wall I was working on. Then, for the first time in my life, I credited myself, came out of nowhere, heard a voice inside saying, "It's okay. You have come so far. You have done what you could. It's okay. You have come so far. You have done what you could. Done what you could. Done what you could. One of the reasons I felt it was very important to read this letter from the trenches is that although this experience might seem atypical, and for this particular cultural jihadist, she looks at herself as not only being the outsider, clearly not falling within the norm, but you're left to believe that nobody out there has gone through the same situation as you, because you are confronted continuously with one stigma or another. And the real crime that you carry from an early age until the day that you lay your head down for good is that you see things differently. You do not fit into the model. And this is a message that you are confronted with constantly. And I find it so poignant, that time when our cultural jihadist came to the conclusion that her own acceptance of herself and the acceptance of living in a perpetual state where things are simply uneasy, things will never be smooth, where you give up on any semblance of conformity. When she realized that this was her path, that very possibly I do not want to put words in the mouth of our cultural jihadist, but I believe that was the point in time where she was able to repeat to herself the mantra, "It is okay. You have come so far. You have done all that you could." Although, as mentioned, that situation is unique. Out of necessity, we are very often compelled to move among the masses in camouflage, in an emotional camouflage. That allows for that buffer that we create to create an artificial safe space between us and those others around us, simply because we know that this condition about being uncomfortable is one that is, apart from being more prevalent than we are willing to give credit for, I think most people have decided to bury that component of their persona for fear of what might come out. A common thread to be found within a number of the subjects that are spoken about on the show deal with the complexity, the juxtaposition, the confusion and manipulation between the components situational and dispositional. And if our fear is being put into a situation where something deep inside us might be blurted out, then we better understand that that uncomfortable component that our cultural jihadists talked about, that is something to be found within perhaps not all of us, but a very large proportion. Because if indeed it did not exist, then the barriers that we create to protect ourselves from each other wouldn't be necessary. And in fact, those barriers have nothing to do with the other people. Those barriers are built because we are so afraid of something deep inside us that would come out, that might change that image though that others have of us, our brand. And that would mean that all of our hard work, all of our travails, all of our efforts would be for naught. And that is our real fear. We are afraid that we will ruin our brand. Reminds me of a conversation I actually had this morning with someone tied to this idea of perfection. So the person was talking about moving towards sustainability or regenerative state, and the fear that a number of people have of being labeled a hypocrite. And the term that we often use is called greenwashing, although I tend to think that it goes much deeper than that. And perhaps one of the difficulties that we have is making a differentiation between that imperfection that exists in all of us due to being human beings, that intolerance that we have towards imperfection within our society, the ability to crucify other individuals due to the fact that they cannot hold up to an ideal that is not possible due to our fragility as being human beings. When it comes to the rest of those things to be found within our ecosystem, aka nature, that's really the part that we dislike the best, that unpredictability, that we don't know how nature is going to react. So let's work on containment. We have free thinkers within our society. We have critical thinkers within our society. We have deep thinkers within our society. But because we can't follow their thought processes, because we are not capable of controlling the dialogue that's going to take place when we have these individuals in for the talk, let's cut them off at the pass. Right? Let's cut them off. And is very often the case. We start on a path and we think it's going to take us to a certain destination. And in the middle of that journey, we find out that we're going somewhere completely different. Well, today is one of those days. For me, I could feel it. Because the idea was to talk about something that is very tangible. It's truly ubiquitous. It's to be found everywhere. And it's the one that we deal with the worst. Tied to that idea of perfection, we have convinced ourselves, due to convenience, due to the lack of energy, due to happenstance, or perhaps even due to habit. We look at each other in a very monolithic perspective. We look at each other in a monolithic perspective, thinking that individuals are born a certain way, they continue a certain way, and they die a certain way. And we've typecast our relations because that's the impression that they left on us at a certain time. And where we really struggle is really with those individuals who are not so easily typecast. We throw people into buckets because those buckets are where we keep the control. It's where we define how far our interactions are going to go. And we feel that we can predict the results. But you know, and I know, and that person on the other side of the room also knows that that is not reality. Now I'm going to freestyle this one. Let's see how we do it. I'm going to go ahead and try to describe an individual, and that individual will exist, and I would suggest that the description, a number of people will feel that I am describing them. Maybe even you. So let's give it a go. We have somebody who was drilled into following a profession or a domain or a sector where the job prospects were easily identified, where the level of success can be best predicted, and where under such calculations, the richness to be found on the other side of the rainbow can be clearly defined. And this person had natural tendencies in that direction, concentrating on natural sciences, which was already a heavy dose because it wasn't a he, it was a she. So for her, the challenge of being able to accomplish something that did not fall within the mold was a natural attraction for her. And because she felt that she needed to see if she can do it, not too dissimilar when I think about it to our cultural jihadists. Both wanted to see how far they can take things, to what degree that image that they had of themselves, that it could be realized. So our heroine studied chemistry and was able to reach that goal. But within that closing, after the diploma, after the profession, she realized that everything that is glitzy is not gold. And she realized that there were other parts, other interests, other desires that she needed to pursue. Again, not too dissimilar to our cultural jihadist. So she moved on to something completely different, and that would be retailing. Taking those products where she was involved in the research and development, dealing with the finished product, and matching those products to those individuals who would have an interest, the so-called product market fit. But she had baggage. And I consider such baggage to be very positive. Just like our cultural jihadist who studied communication, who studied society and the constructs to be found within society, our heroine here has taken her scientific baggage with her to retailing, which means that she will always be in the subject in a way that very few others can actually partake in it. That means she will look at the subject completely different. She will come to conclusions that the others will not come to simply because her perspective was going to be different. But she reached a point where that had no other interest for her. She felt that she had reached the end of what she could learn. She learned that the retailing was actually quite mundane, not as exciting as she thought it might be. Or simply she mastered that of what she could and decided that it was time to move on. At that point in time, she decided to move into academia. So the confines, the academic confines, were not ones that she immediately fell into. That was something that she grew into in a way that the others, again, would not be able to follow. The scientific background worked pretty well. The rigorousness that was required for her to master the chemistry worked quite well in the academic realm. But that retailing, that threw everybody for a loop. Because they just could not follow why her focus would be there and not here. Is that story that unique? I don't think so. And in fact, the interesting part is that we are running around reducing the contact that we have to each other simply because it keeps us in line. But in fact, when we start talking about different things, that's where the magic comes in. Have you ever been in a situation where you're talking to somebody that let's say you're meeting that person for the first time. And you're both coming from very different backgrounds, very different experiences. And there's a point in time in that conversation where you realize that you have a commonality that could not have been predicted based upon these monolithic ways that we are told that things are that don't befit reality. Through that opening up, these two people will realize that they have something in common, a subject, a passion, an interest that it was only possible to find out about it through a random conversation between two strangers. What do you think that does for the perspectives of the two individuals, the strangers that meet and find out that they have a common passion? Let's leave it at passion. I bet you both of them will first perhaps suffer under cognitive dissonance because they would think, well, that's not possible because only somebody coming from my background would be able to have that passion. That would be the first blockage that would be removed. And the second step would be tied to perspectives. Then you would realize that actually somebody from a different background, from a different interest, from a different class, that they can have the same passion as I do. And come to think of it, the third part possibly could be remorse. Remorse mixed with joy. The remorse part would be, how could I think that those people, and I'm putting this in pejorative, those people as we classify individuals, how could I think that those people could never have the same passion as me? So on the one hand, you're glad that you found that out, but then you almost punish yourself because you caught yourself in a bias. It was a thinking synapse, a hole in our logic. And you might even persecute yourself after stumbling across your error. Because as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, it's not the others, or not just the others, that are using perfection as their benchmark. And I think this has everything to do with our creative jihadist. That we use that benchmark against ourselves. The fact is that we have different interests. Just because we're not delving with those interests right now doesn't mean they don't exist. Very often we'll weave into different interest groups, either consciously or perhaps most likely concentrating on the subconscious. And there is a natural flow. Whether we acknowledge it or not. There are a couple of concepts that I'd like to talk about today in this show. First one is an approach following that of what I've mentioned so far. Very often through happenstance that we run across common interests that we would have never realized otherwise because we were perhaps compelled due to the circumstance, or perhaps we were just having a good day and wanted to have a chat with a stranger, or it was based upon developments that we could not have predicted. We started that conversation with somebody else and came to that conclusion, as I mentioned in the story, that common passion that we have. And very often these individuals will be the ones who will come up with solutions for vexing problems that we might have. Things that we think about a lot, things that hold us back, things that consume our energy. But because of the blockers that we have established, and this is all very normal, we cannot see the solution that perhaps is right in front of our nose. And so through these chance encounters that are to be found, and through those commonalities which are to be found within this concept of the community of practice, that we are able to solve all kinds of issues that we didn't think were solvable. I'm going to recite a story that I stumbled across maybe about 20 years ago now. And it was tied to the subject of community of practice. So you have two executives that are holding a rather intense conversation in an elevator. There were obviously no concerns about data protection. And because they were holding a conversation among themselves, they felt that it was very insular, and the others that would enter the elevator would not be listening, would not be understanding, would not find the conversation to be relevant, so they found no danger in holding this conversation. Within games, very often you build within your construct something that's called the magic circle. Within the magic circle, that means that nothing can go wrong, that you've created a safe space where you can exit it at any time, and anything that takes place within the magic circle stays in the magic circle. Well, I tend to think that these two executives have created a magic circle, perhaps not necessarily following the same confines of the game or the game concept, but rather they felt that this was their world and that the world was their magic circle. In any case, they continue with this conversation, and so the elevator would make several stops. It was on a high-rise, and of course, them being executives, they were coming from the top. So people would get in, people would get out, and they would continue with their conversations. So there was an assistant that entered the elevator in one of the lower floors. And like everybody else who had entered that elevator, she was also listening to the conversation. And because their conversation was tied to a very vexing problem, they kept going back and forth. Well, this assistant, lowly person within the organization, right? She gives them the answer that they've been struggling with. And so these executives are speechless, which is really saying something. They became speechless. And then after they finally came to their wits, they asked the assistant that how come she knows so much about this subject. They didn't question why she was an assistant. It was cognitive dissonance, and they felt an assistant could not know that much. Basically, that was the attitude. And probably because she was a woman as well. Let's add that for good measure. And then she continued to tell them that she wrote her master's thesis on that subject. The assistant finally reached the floor that she was heading towards, wished the executives a good day, stepped out of the elevator, never to be seen by those two executives again. Now, the story I've made, perhaps added a little bit of dramaticism to it all. But you get my point. You get my point that we have people within our society that we have typecast into having certain knowledge, certain wisdom, certain capabilities. And we identify that knowledge, wisdom, capabilities with the title that they hold. And this is another method or model that we use to reinforce this monolithic way of looking at things. But as you could tell within the story, one that I would argue is not that unique. You start to realize on what kind of foundation this monolithic way of looking at things, what it's actually built on, right? And just like our creative jihadist, who came to the conclusion that the mold that she was placing for herself was not the one that she really belongs to, right? It's not the one that she belongs to, not the one that she wanted to belong to. It's very possibly the one that she was typecast into, the one that she utilized to a certain degree to make the transition to her true passion. But it wasn't the one that she identified herself with, and that's really the key. It was the one that the others identified for her. And she looked at this typecasting as being a form of a societal straitjacket, right? There's another model that I kind of pushed to the side, and I felt that it was appropriate to talk about it today, and it's called Ikigai. And at first, if you think of this term, and it's not English, it's Japanese. Iki means yucky, or messy, and gai, of course, is a male. But in this particular case, we're not talking about that. There are three parts. Actually, there's a commercial version, a very commercial version that includes how you make money, and I'm definitely not going to go down that road. The three components would be what you love or deeply passionate about, those things that you're good at, and what the world needs. And the idea is to take these three components, put them on a list, and where you find a crossover, looking at this in the form of a Venn diagram, where you have the crossover is that Ikigai. So I won't go into too much detail. I'll kind of speed through this, but I actually performed this activity on myself. Didn't necessarily come to the conclusions. Obviously, this is a process that cannot be completed in a couple minutes. It requires a lot of thoughts, and very possibly those thoughts that you generate by performing such an activity will take you down a couple different roads. But for me, the passion is fairness. Fairness to me, fairness to others, and both are to be persecuted. I hate fairness. I hate the lack of fairness in all its forms. The idea of living a full life in whatever form that may take, and to make sure that others are part of that full life. And there's probably some that I haven't thought of before, because basically I'm on a journey, and I wouldn't be surprised that you might have even recognized some of them, some of those passions, just if you've listened to any of these other the other shows that I put together. Yeah, what I'm good at. I think I look at things different. I think I have also come to the conclusion that I accept being uncomfortable and actually thrive in being uncomfortable. And perhaps through that passion, through that honesty or the attempt to be honest, might be a source for others. And what does the world need? The world needs a lot. But we definitely need a world where everybody is respected. Everyone is given the opportunity to reach their potential. Everyone is able to perform autonomy and mastery. And that we perform this through sharing and not through competition. So I'm not quite sure what that magic point is within that Venn diagram. But I do believe that part of it, a large part, is allowing yourself to not live within the confines of that monolithic label that you originally chose, you felt that you had to choose, that one that is been ordained to you from others because it makes their life easier, requires them to put things into very clean boxes. So once you come to the conclusion that that is not your problem, doesn't make the rest easier, but you need to come to that conclusion before you can actually realize and accept the way you are. Because then you start understanding that you are inconsistent, that you are contradictory, and that every day is not full of power. And that there might be some periods where it might be more uncomfortable than others. So you accept that condition, knowing full well that the goal is not happiness. No, the goal is not happiness. The goal is contentment. And that contentment is only to be found within that acceptance that things are just damn uncomfortable. Yes, indeed, they are uncomfortable. So that is your homework for today's students. Chew on that one for a while and let me know where it takes you. Well, I know where it's taken me today. We are coming to the last seconds of the show. I'd like to thank you for again letting me indulge on this mental journey within Tipping Point. Till next week. Thanks.